This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Last week, we told you about a call for American educators to do more to protect students from sexual violence on campus. The government recently sent a letter telling schools, colleges, and universities that such violence is a form of sex discrimination. That means it violates a 1972 law against discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs and activities. The letter says schools must take steps like making sure victims know their rights and are kept informed about investigations. Victims must also be protected if the accused attacker is still in school with them. Ruslan Ali is Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the Department of Education. She and her staff wrote that letter. Our sense of urgency could not be greater, she says. I'm sure any parent in America would say they don't want their child to go to college or school and have to be worried about being raped. And we are going to work with officials to make sure that doesn't happen. One of those officials is Mary Mayhew. She leads efforts to prevent sexual harassment and rape at the University of New Hampshire. That was where Vice President Joe Biden and Education Secretary Arne Duncan released the guidance letter in April. Ms. Mayhew says she believes sexual violence on campuses has actually decreased over the past 20 years. She says schools are getting better at educating students to understand the idea of consent. Or, put more simply, that no means no. She says between 1988 and 2000 was when we really started implementing education campaigns about what consent is. And that did amount to some degree of prevention. Ms. Mayhew says the warning from the government to pay more attention to the problem might lead more schools to start or expand their programs. At the same time, however, it might also lead to an increase in reports of sexual assaults. Not necessarily because the problem has gotten worse, she says, but because more students will know their rights and be willing to report attacks on campus. Ruslan Ali at the Education Department says the government is ready to take action against schools that fail to protect their students. She says where there are violations, and in the case where officials are not willing to comply with the nation's civil rights laws, we will enforce the laws vigorously. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. If you want to read that 19-page letter, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. What is the best way to learn a new language? A small study of foreign language learning in adults compared two methods. One is known as the explicit or classroom method. This is the kind of traditional classroom teaching where students are taught a lot of information about grammar rules. The other method is known as the implicit or immersion method. The idea here is to learn much the way children do when they learn a native language. That is, by being with native speakers and absorbing the language that surrounds them, generally without a lot of explanation. Teachers may combine these two methods into what Professor Michael Ullman calls immersion-style classroom teaching. But is that necessarily a better way to learn a language? Mr. Ullman was the senior investigator for the new study. He is a professor of neuroscience at Georgetown University Medical Center in Washington. He says he was surprised to find that combining the two methods might not help the brain in processing the new language. If he had to learn a language, what would he do? One possibility would be to start with classroom and then go to immersion. But he says there is a possibility that classroom could hurt later immersion. That is one possibility in interpreting the data. The Public Library of Science published the study earlier this year. The 21 adults in the experiment learned Brocanto 2, a 13-word language created for the study. The words and grammar rules relate to a computer game similar to chess that the learners played. For example, Blom Nemo Lu Nip Li Praz means the square Blom piece switches with the Nip piece. The researchers tested the people 3 to 6 months after they had learned the language to see how well they could remember it. The study found that those who had learned it with the immersion method had brain waves similar to those of native speakers of a language when speaking that language. Professor Ullman says those who trained with the classroom method also became more native-like in their brain processing. But only the immersion group showed full native-like processing of the grammar. Still, he says teachers should not make any curriculum changes based on his findings. He says further research is needed. And it may be, for example, that a combination of classroom and immersion might be best. But we don't know that. For VOA Special English, I'm Mario Ritter.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Education Report. In Giles County, Virginia, the school board has removed displays of the 10 Commandments in its schools. The county thought that posting the 10 Commandments along with the first part of the United States Constitution might help increase moral values. There had been few complaints since the commandments were posted almost 12 years ago. But recently, civil liberties groups had threatened to take the county to court if it did not remove them. The United States Supreme Court permits the 10 Commandments to be on public property so long as the goal of displaying them is not to gain support for religion. But in 1980, the court ruled that the 10 Commandments cannot be shown in public schools because displaying them shows support of religion by the government. Jewish and Christian holy books say the 10 Commandments were laws given to the prophet Moses by God. Many Americans believe the country was founded on Judeo-Christian beliefs. Many of their beliefs are expressed in the 10 Commandments. They are a set of rules against murder, stealing, cheating, adultery, and profanity. Douglas Laycock is a professor of constitutional law at the University of Virginia School of Law in Charlottesville. He says the Supreme Court has ruled that governments must be neutral about religious teachings. He said, putting up the Ten Commandments in a way that promotes the Jewish and Christian scriptures is a violation of the Constitution, and especially if they do it in a public school. Officials in Giles County say they may put the Ten Commandments back on the walls of the schools, but will add other historical documents. Professor Laycock says it is possible that might satisfy a court. Since the Supreme Court ruling in 1980, more conservative justices have been appointed to the court. Professor Laycock says some conservative activists believe this new, more conservative court might be willing to once again permit the Ten Commandments to be displayed in public schools. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. Tell us what you think about religion in public schools. You can comment at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also find transcripts and MP3s of our reports. And you can find us on Facebook at VOA Learning English.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. Street children in Ethiopia say their biggest need is shelter. But a study shows that local non-governmental organizations and community groups rarely offer what the street children want. The international aid group Save the Children did the study. One of the researchers says the limited services provided by local NGOs do not match what the children see as their greatest needs. Save the Children talked with children living on the streets in 5 major cities, 3 regional towns, and 8 rural villages. The children discussed many subjects, including their needs, their health, and the risks they face. There are about 30,000 street children in Ethiopia. About 17,000 of them live in the capital, Addis Ababa. More than half of the children do not have access to shelter or enough food. They survive mostly on what they receive from shining shoes, selling small items to passers-by, and appealing to strangers for help. The street children face health threats. Research shows that about 30% are seriously sick, but most do not have any kind of treatment available. About 40% of the children may have been forced to have sex. The children believe that having shelter will reduce these kinds of risks. The child assistance group Goal Ethiopia used to provide shelter for street children, but it found that this discouraged the children from re-entering their own communities. The Ethiopian government is finishing work on a national social protection strategy. It will include new ways of providing support to families to reduce poverty and keep children off the streets. For VOA Learning English, I'm Mario Ritter.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Recently, we told you about a finding that more years of school could help students get higher scores on intelligence tests. That was the finding of a study of teenage males in Norway. Now, other research shows that physical activity may help students do better in their classes. The research comes as educators in some countries are reducing time for activities like physical education. They are using the time instead for academic subjects like math and reading. Researchers at VU University Medical Center in Amsterdam reviewed the results of 14 studies. 12 were from the United States, 1 from Canada, and 1 from South Africa. The studies appeared between 1997 and 2009. They included more than 55,000 children, ages 6 to 18. Researcher Amika Singh says the studies showed a link between physical activity and scores on subjects such as math, English, and reading. Based on the results of our study, we can conclude that being physically active is beneficial for academic performance. Ms. Singh offers some possible explanations. There are, first, physiological explanations, like more blood flow, and so more oxygen to the brain. Being physically active means there are more hormones produced, like endorphins. And endorphins make your stress level lower and your mood improved, which means you also perform better. Also, students involved in organized sports learn rules and how to follow them. This could improve their classroom behavior and help them keep their mind on their work. The study leaves some questions unanswered, however. Ms. Singh says it is not possible to say whether the amount or kind of activity affected the level of academic improvement. This is because of differences among the studies. Also, they were mostly observational studies. An observational study is where researchers do not do controlled comparisons. They only describe what they observe. So they might observe that physically active students are more likely to do better in school. But that link does not necessarily mean being active was the cause of those higher grades. The researchers called for more high-quality studies to confirm their findings. They said they found only 2 high-quality studies. They also pointed out that outcomes for other parts of the world may be quite different. The findings appeared in the archives of pediatric and adolescent medicine. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Frasuti.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Education Report. Surveys of American teenagers find that about half of them do not get enough sleep on school nights. They get an average of 60 to 90 minutes less than experts say they need. One reason for this deficit is biology. experts say teens are biologically programmed to go to sleep later and wake up later than other age groups. Yet many schools start classes as early as 7 in the morning. As a result, many students go to class feeling like 16-year-old Danny. He plays 2 sports, lacrosse and football. He is an active teen, except in the morning. He says getting up in the morning is pretty terrible. He is very tired. Through first and second period of school, he can barely stay awake. Michael Bruce is a clinical psychologist with a specialty in sleep disorders. He says teenagers need to sleep 8 to 9 hours or even 9 to 10 hours a night. He says sleepy teens can experience a form of depression that could have big effects on their general well-being. It can affect not just their ability in the classroom, but also playing sports and driving a car. Michael Bruce says any tired driver is dangerous, but especially a teenager with a lack of experience. So what can schools do about sleepy students? The psychologist says one thing they can do is start classes later in the morning. He points to studies showing that students can improve by a full letter grade in their first and second period classes. Eric Peterson is the head of St. George's School in the state of Rhode Island. He wanted to see if a 30-minute delay would make a difference. It did. He says visits to the health center by tired students decreased by half. Late arrivals to first period fell by a third. And students reported that they were less sleepy during the day. Eric Peterson knows that changing start times is easier at a small private boarding school like his. But he is hopeful that other schools will find a way. Patricia Moss, an assistant dean at St. George's School, says students were not the only ones reporting better results. She says just about all the teachers noticed immediately much more alertness in class and a more positive mood. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can read, listen, and comment on our programs at voaspecialenglish.com. We are also on Facebook and Twitter at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Spain is struggling with a recession. More than 1 in 5 Spaniards are out of work. The unemployment rate is the highest of the 17 nations that use the euro. But one area of the economy that seems to be doing well is English classes. A report this year from the EF Education First Company listed Spain as a low proficiency country in English. Spain ranked just below Italy and just above Taiwan. About a fifth of the world speaks Spanish. There are many Spanish-language TV shows and movies. Spaniards can also watch Hollywood movies dubbed in Spanish or news from Latin America. One of the few English voices on Spanish TV belongs to Richard Vaughn. Mr. Vaughn is from Texas, but for 35 years has lived in Spain. He operates that country's biggest English teaching company. It even has its own TV channel. Aprende Inglés, Learn English, is Spain's only national channel in English. He says people watch his channel and take his classes to get a better job. People don't learn English here for cultural reasons. Some do. But the motive is always, 99% of the time, professional. Modern changes in the world economy, globalization, may offer chances for a better job in another country. But economic problems at home can also make people feel they have few other choices. The director of the Language Center at the London School of Economics says language learning is up across Europe. In Spain, some of those studying English hope for jobs in Britain or the United States. But others want to work for international companies with offices in Spain. Many companies now require workers to be bilingual. Dominic Campbell is an American who lives in Madrid and teaches English part-time. He says a lot of jobs now want at least Spanish and English, and a lot of them are asking for Spanish, English, and French, especially airlines. He says many of his students thought, "I've got Spanish. That's all I need." But people also need jobs. More than 40% of Spaniards in their 20s are out of work. Inigo Gomez has an education degree but could not find a teaching job. So I think it's a good idea to go to the United Kingdom and try to find a job as a Spanish teacher. And while he does that, many Spaniards, for the first time, will be spreading their new education in English at home. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. You can learn English and get the latest news every day at voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. A 3-year effort in developing countries will seek to put 25 million children in school for the first time. Another goal of the Global Partnership for Education is to train 600,000 teachers. The partnership recently awarded nearly $170 million in grants to 7 countries. These were the first grants since the organization changed its name a few months ago from the Fast Track Initiative. Fast Track was founded in 2002. Charles Tapp is an advisor to the partnership. He says, "There had been a lot of evolution of the old Fast Track Initiative, which was essentially something of a donors club, I think. And what was clear from our perspective was that we were not just a funding entity. This was indeed a partnership." The partnership includes almost 50 developing countries, as well as donors, civil society groups, and teacher organizations. It also includes private companies, international development banks, and United Nations agencies. The latest grants were awarded to Afghanistan, Ivory Coast, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Moldova, Mongolia, and Timor-Leste. Mr. Tapp says the grant to Afghanistan is worth almost $56 million. He says the Afghan government has made a very strong commitment of allocating as much of its own resources as it can for education. Historically, Afghanistan has had some very, very well-educated people. They tend to come from sort of the urban centers. But obviously, Given the recent troubles and problems in Afghanistan over the last 20 years or so, the quality of education has plummeted. Mr. Tapp says Ivory Coast received $41 million to help in its recovery from the recent political violence there. One goal is to get school feeding programs in place. Mr. Tapp says more countries are now looking for help from the partnership. Unfortunately, given the current global financial climate and the fact that there are still 67 million kids out of school around the world, demand for our financing seems to be increasing rather than decreasing. But many donor countries are reducing their spending. So, he says the partnership must show them that their money is being well spent. He says it's very clear that in the global partnership partner countries that you're seeing more kids getting to school for longer and for a better education. And as education improves, he says, so does the health of a country. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. A new experimental program using MOOCs, or Massive Open Online Courses, opened recently in Kigali, Rwanda. The Kepler project is designed for people in the developing world. It uses MOOCs provided by foreign universities. It combines these online classes with help from local instructors and an internship program. A business foundation is helping to finance the first 4 years of the project. The students in the Kepler project pay no tuition. 50 students are taking part in the first class in Rwanda. Canadian educational consultant Tony Bates praises the Kepler program for giving students a way to earn college credits. Students can earn academic credit through the Kepler Project's agreement with Southern New Hampshire University in the United States. Mr. Bates also praises Kepler for providing local support and tutoring in Rwanda. But he says a lack of technology limits the usefulness of such a system in Africa. He says developing countries lack enough internet service outside major cities. Students may have mobile phones, but usually with very low bandwidth. Mr. Bates says it costs $1 American to watch an 8-minute YouTube video on a low-cost handset. That is about the same as many Africans earn in a day. Tony Bates says streaming long video lectures would be too expensive for at least the next 5 to 10 years. He says using materials designed for mobile devices may be better. He notes examples like math videos from the Khan Academy and courses from the Carnegie Mellon Open Learning Initiative. He says these materials are designed for distance learning and are more interactive. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Persutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, has reported some good news about education in two areas of Somalia. Puntland and Somaliland are now relatively peaceful and secure, at least compared to central and southern Somalia. A study found that in Puntland, the share of students in primary education increased from 26% to 43% over the last 5 years. A smaller increase was reported in Somaliland. In both cases, the gains in school attendance were greater among boys than among girls. Girls leaving school is a problem across Somalia. For example, only 1/3 of Somali girls who had completed first grade took the Form 4 exam in the 2011-2012 school year. And girls represent only 28% of students in Somali secondary schools. The communications chief for UNICEF in Somalia, Susanna Price, says more schools are being built. She says the agency is developing projects in several fields of education. She also says UNICEF has been working on training teachers and developing non-traditional forms of education. Some of these programs are for children of families that herd livestock and move from place to place. Susanna Price says education is very important to the future of Somalia. But there are problems in getting parents to send girls to school. The spokeswoman says UNICEF encourages equality between males and females in education. More universal education could help Puntland and Somaliland also improve other areas of development, such as health care. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. In the last 10 years, hundreds of American schools have begun to offer a new way to teach foreign languages. This method is called dual or two-way immersion. Here's how it works at London Town Elementary School in Centerville, Virginia, outside Washington. In some classes, only Spanish is spoken, even during the Pledge of Allegiance, a morning tradition for American school children. In one second grade class, the children learn math and other subjects completely in Spanish. Later in the day, they learn only in English. Half of the children are from families that speak Spanish at home. The other half are native English speakers. Myra Almeida is the teacher. She says when both these groups come together, they are learning from one another, which is very good. Helen Arzola teaches the youngest children. She says a child before age 8 is a language learning machine, so this is the best time to learn a language. She says her kindergartners from English-speaking families may have never heard Spanish before. And she says children from Spanish-speaking families benefit from learning in their own language. Helen Arzola says the goal of the dual language program is to teach low-income Hispanic children English, good English, social English, and academic English. But some people are still not sure about these programs. They say bilingual education has not always taught Hispanic students enough English. London Town Elementary is in Fairfax County, Virginia. The county also offers immersion programs in French, German, and Japanese. One sixth grader at London Town says it's not like traditional teaching. Another student says she likes to learn other languages. But a national survey found that in recent years, foreign language teaching decreased in public elementary and middle schools. Fewer schools teach French, German, Russian, or Japanese. Some schools say a federal education law from the last administration has hurt language teaching. This law only requires testing of progress in math and reading. Schools also face language teacher shortages and now budget cuts caused by the economy. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report. You can watch a video of this report by Jerome Sokolovsky at voaspecialenglish.com.